All right, so we are going through the book of Daniel, and we are at chapter 11, and this is the probably the most difficult chapter of all, because the last part of the chapter is the part where you have the most interpretations. You have differing interpretations, and all of them have merit and value. And as I pointed out last week, I myself am a bit uncertain. But what I'm going to do this week is to look at it even more closer. Last week we tried to look at some of the different ideas and to see if we could determine which of them made the most sense. And I'm going to do that and we're going to look even more close to this week. What I'm going to do first of all, though, is do a kind of little revision of what we did last week. Just show some illustrations on the screen and just remind ourselves of what we saw last week before we actually go into the text itself. So this is the general outline of Daniel chapter 11. I know that while some people say that they had a better understanding of the chapter, there were still some people who were a little bit confused, and I don't want that. But I know that for people who are brand new to the study of the book, that chapter especially is daunting. So basically what we saw, this is what the chapter talks about. I'm going to give it just a general outline. It starts with looking at, well, it starts with the Medo-Persian kingdom. I'm not going to touch on it because it just barely mentions that there will stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and then it goes on to Greece, and it talks about, when it comes to the Greek kingdom, it tells you about Alexander the Great, the first king, and then it tells you about the kingdom being divided among the 4 generals, Alexander's 4 generals. Their names were Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. That should be simple enough. I hope I haven't. If I happen to be leaving anybody behind, please stop me. But remember, the Greek kingdom, basically, it was split up in four pieces after Alexander the Great died. The next thing that happens, we see that the Greek these 4 divisions, they join together and they become 2. Basically, Greece is divided up into the kingdoms of Seleucus and Ptolemy, those 2 that we see at the bottom. The kingdoms of Cassander and Lysimachus, they are absorbed by the Seleucus kingdom, the Seleucid kingdom, right? So you ended up with 2 kingdoms, and hereafter they are referred to as the king of the south and the king of the north. The kingdom of Ptolemy was in Egypt, and the kingdom of Seleucus was in Syria. But as we saw, it expanded to take in the other 2 kingdoms, the Lysimachus kingdom and the Cassander kingdom. So the Seleucid kingdom was bigger than the Egyptian kingdom. But basically, they were the king of the north and the king of the south. And then, so the next section of Daniel 11, you have conflict between these 2 kingdoms. If you look on the left, you'll see that most of the kings who reigned in Egypt, they were called Ptolemy. Philadelphus, Euergetes, Philopator, Epiphanes. Epiphanes was the youngest. He was a little 5-year-old boy. And then you have on the other side, you had a couple of Antiochus. Then you had a Seleucus, Callinicus. Then you had an Antiochus Magnus. And Antiochus Magnus, that last one on the right in the north, he actually tried to make war against the last one in the south. When he was 5 years old, he tried to make war against this little boy. And actually the Romans, they were the next power about to arise now. The Romans were about to rise, and they actually came to defend little Ptolemy Epiphanes. All right, so the next power we see arising was Rome. Now, Rome arose in the north, but Rome took over the world. So basically, Rome straddled both the south and the north. But you had Rome divided up kind of in Daniel 11, you see Rome divided into two parts. One part of Rome is in the south, and one part of Rome is in the north. In the southern part, you had Pompey. At first, there was Pompey. During the time when Julius Caesar was coming into power, he and Julius Caesar were kind of reigning together. And then Julius Caesar made war against Pompey, and he was defeated. But Julius Caesar was murdered by his friends. And so the next two that you see there, Mark Antony and Augustus Caesar, they joined together to fight against the people who murdered Caesar, who murdered Julius Caesar. And they defeated them. And then Mark Antony now, he began to rule in Egypt. And Augustus Caesar, he began to rule in the normal region where Rome is. And again, the both of them didn't get along. So Augustus Caesar, he attacked Mark Antony and defeated him. The next Caesar that came along was called Tiberius Caesar, and he was called this vile person who got into the kingdom by flatteries and so forth. So this basically is a third section. Then the next section, we see where it changes. It says the king of the north will return, but it shall not be as at the former time. What we see is that we now have a description of the papacy. Now the papacy begins the ascendancy and is labeled as the king of the north. The papacy takes the place of Christ, usurps Christ. Believers are corrupted. There's a lot of persecution, and the papacy is worshiping a strange God. Now, last week when we talked about this strange God, we had a little discussion about it, and I leaned towards the idea that this king of the north that worships this strange God, that it could have something to do with the secular power of secular Europe. But this week, I'm going to change my mind, because I was looking at it more closely. I'm going to change my mind, and I'm going to explain why in a little while. So I'm going to say that this king of the north here is the papacy right through. It's the northern king. It's the same beast kingdom, but this is the little horn. Remember in Daniel 7, it says that there was a little horn that came up on the head of the beast, and it became a mouthpiece. I think this is the same little horn. I'm going to show you why I think so in just a moment. So the fourth description here is the description of papal Rome. And then you have the final section of Daniel 11, where it talks about at the time of the end. And if you notice, I have put question marks at the top, because at this point, who is the king of the north and who is the king of the south? It's not very clear, because if we go back a little bit, we'll see that the last time it mentioned the king of the south was when Rome was having conflicts within itself. You had Mark Antony fighting against Augustus Caesar, or vice versa. Then Mark Antony was defeated. There's no king of the south now. Rome is unified. There's nobody ruling in Egypt. And then the papacy comes on the scene, and he becomes this king who is corrupting believers, and he's bringing persecution, and he's worshiping the strange God. Then now it comes back and it says, at the time of the end, the king of the south pushes at the king of the north. So you ask, who is this king of the south? Because now Rome no longer has a southern part. So who is this king of the south? The best you can say is, well, whoever was in Egypt was always the king of the south. But you know what is the problem? There's no king in Egypt There has been no king in Egypt after the time of the Roman Empire, and Egypt has been a third-rate country. It has not been a country with any kind of military or political power. A it has been a country with a very low profile. So is Egypt still the king of the south? Because right through Egypt has been the king of the south. But to say at the time of the end, Egypt will now attack the king of the north, that doesn't seem to make reasonable sense. Why? Because Egypt is not a significant political power. And what about the king of the north? The last we saw the king of the north was the papacy. So are we still looking at the papacy? And who is it that attacks the papacy at the time of the end? If it is the papacy. And then it says now, the king of the north responds. He comes like a whirlwind and he attacks the king of the south like a whirlwind. And it mentions that he attacks Egypt, the Libyans, the Ethiopians, and also the glorious land. Now, I'm going to take a little time. We're going to go to the Bible. I'm going to come back to the diagrams. But just pause with the diagrams for a moment. Let's go to the Bible and actually read what the Bible says about the northern king in this last moment. Then we'll come back to the diagrams. Okay? Let me pause. Is there anything I just said that anybody didn't understand? It's most important to me that everybody follows. I mean, what I did, I left out the details. Last week we looked at details. This week it's just a broad overview. So I hope everybody could get what I was just trying to say.
Brother David.
Yes, Brother Warren.
I'm not real up on the historical side, but wasn't there an Antiochus Epiphanes who did something pretty vile as well, who went into the temple in the Greek Empire and slaughtered a pig on the altar or something like that? Where does he fit in?
I know that there are many commentators who say that one of these kings in Daniel 11 and in Daniel 8 represents Antiochus Epiphanes. I completely disagree. And I'm going to highlight why I disagree, Brother Warren. The thing is that if we take Daniel as a unified book, if we take that the prophecies of Daniel, in the prophecies of Daniel, God is trying to give us the same history 4 times. There is no room for Antiochus Epiphanes because it takes you from Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And this vile king, he appears during the Roman Empire, during the reign of Rome. I'm going to show in just a moment why I take that conclusion kind of strongly. All right, but anyway, let me go to the Bible.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that.
You're welcome,
Hey,
brother.
David, there's
Yes,
one
Brother
person. There's one person there asking about verse 40 and 45. That's been hard to understand. He's saying, I wonder what he's referring to. Juan Carlos, I think it is. Verses 40 through 45.
That's exactly where I'm going to read now, Brother Ray. I know it's hard to understand because I can't say that I understand it perfectly either. But what we can do is what I want us to do is to read through those verses together, and then I'll show you. We will look at the challenges and the difficulties, and we will see if we can at least have a reasonable way to approach it. That's what I would like to see. That's what I'd like us to do. All right. If you look at I'm going to use this panel here. I have four Bibles open on the screen, and I have a reason for this. But at the moment, let's just use the right panel at the top. Now we start at verse 40. It says, and at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. This is what I just said. Who is this king of the south? All right, we're not sure. But the king of the north here could be the papacy, or it could be the European Union. Those are the two things that I would have. I can't think of anything else. But let us say it's a papacy because right now I'm leaning towards the papacy. Okay? And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Let me do something here quickly. I'm going to change my view a little bit because I'd like to put up a map so we can actually look at the names of the countries. Give me a second here, brothers and sisters. All right, I hope you can all see my map. All right, let me see. Can I make it bigger? Probably not. All right, anyway, I hope you can see this little area here. I think I can highlight it. Let me do that. All right, here you see Edom, Moab, and Ammon. My highlighter is very, I don't know if you can see my highlighter.
Yeah, we can see.
All right, thank you. So you have, down here is Egypt. This is where Egypt is. And up here is the area of the king of the north. All right. But it actually extends way up over here. So into Europe. This is actually where Turkey is today. But the king of the north takes Europe and Rome and all this upper area. But anyway, it says that the king of the south, let us say that it's Egypt because it has always been Egypt. Egypt will push or antagonize the northern king. Now, the northern king attacks like a whirlwind. He comes against the southern king. And it says he passes through this little area is where Israel is. The glorious land, and he overflows and he attacks Egypt. But these escape out of his hand. Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Now, if you look at Ammon and Moab and Edom, you'll notice that they are right up beside Israel. They are locked in right beside Israel. They also represent close relatives of Israel because Edom was Jacob's brother. He was the brother of Israel. Moab was the son of Lot, and so was Ammon. Ammon and Ben-Ami, right? They were the fathers of Moab and Ammon, and they were the children of Lot. So there's something that we are being told here. The close relatives of Israel, they are right up beside Israel. They will escape the attack of the northern king. So that may mean something. But anyway, I wanted to point that out. Let's go back to the passage and continue reading. So it says,
Can I ask a question?
yes, go ahead, Brother Al.
I was looking at this and I've often wondered where we have now, what's going on now in the world, right now, where you have Islam invading Europe and other countries. Could this be where it's actually Islam against the Europeans? And because this would kind of explain it to me that it would be the same thing. Islam is south invading the north, and there's going to be a pushback.
To be honest, I'm seeing more and more that this is a very feasible interpretation, and we're going to look at that in just a moment.
Okay.
I'm not going to neglect it because I think it's a very feasible interpretation. But the point is, whatever we look at, we have to have a principle for approaching it this way. We have to be able to say, here is the logic behind what we are doing. And I know you appreciate and understand this. The thing is that there are so many ideas that get thrown out there, but a lot of these ideas, they don't have a foundation. Last week, Sister Diane mentioned you have to have a key for your interpretation, and I agree. You know, one of the things that we ridicule about the way people interpret prophecy, particularly in some kinds of churches. They say a beast comes out of the sea, and they're looking for a literal beast or some kind of crazy idea. They don't have a principle for approaching it, and we want to make sure that every idea that we present, there's a solid foundational reason why we say this approach makes sense. So I know you understand that. So I want us to look at that, yes, but we will see why do we think this is feasible.
Hey, Brother David,
Yes, Brother Ray.
is it, I mean, my understanding, I might be wrong. Isn't it like an invasion? Isn't it supposed to be like a war kind of thing? Like a physical war thing instead of a political invasion? Or could it be?
Well, that's another question, but as I say, everything depends upon what do we see as a logical approach. Once we establish the logical approach, then we can answer that question. So I'm going to come to that. Let's just finish reading through the passage. All right, so it says in verse 41, he will enter the glorious land. Many shall be overthrown, but these shall escape, Edom, Moab, the chief of the children of Ammon. He goes on to say, he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So it's interesting that it says, the land of Egypt shall not escape. All right, ignore that map. The land of Egypt shall not escape, because he's actually, if Egypt is the king of the south, why does he mention that the land of Egypt shall not escape? Because obviously you would think he's attacking Egypt. The south is Egypt, but he mentions Egypt. And it says, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. Another version of the Bible says, the Libyans and the Ethiopians will follow. The Libyans and the Ethiopians will follow at his heels. And what this suggests is that, like when somebody is following at your heels, another idea is that they are following as captives. They are following in submission. It says in the NIV, the Libyans and the Cushites in submission. So it suggests that he's going to conquer Egypt, and he's going to bring the Libyans and the Ethiopians into submission, so that they are going to be defeated by this king as well. Then it goes on to say now, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. He gets some news, and he's alarmed at this news. Therefore, because of this news, he goes forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. So he goes out to destroy because of the news that he hears. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas, in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. So, where exactly is the glorious holy mountain? And there's hardly any place that you could misunderstand. Let's see if I can see where it is here on this map. Look at this map. Right here is the Mediterranean Sea, this blue area here. And right here, this smaller blue area is the Dead Sea. And in between, right in here, is Jerusalem. This is Jerusalem, right where the highlighter is. The place that is referred to as the Holy Mountain is Jerusalem. It says between the seas. It's right between the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea, and it's in the glorious Holy Mountain. How do we know that Jerusalem is the place referred to as the Holy Mountain? If we go to Daniel chapter, let me go back to Daniel chapter 9, where Daniel was praying. I think he says in verse 16. He says, O Lord, according to all thy righteousness, I beseech thee, let thine anger and thy fury be turned away from thy city Jerusalem, thy holy mountain. Okay, so we don't really have too much question right here. When it talks about the holy mountain of God, in this case it says the glorious holy mountain. What it's talking about is it's talking about Jerusalem. All right, so what this is saying is that this king of the north is going to set up, it says, the tabernacle of his palace. He's going to set up his dwelling place. I'm in the wrong chapter. His dwelling place in Jerusalem. And yet that is not, it's not as simple as this. It's not as simple as this. We still have to understand a few things. Now, before I go any further, let me go back to my illustrations, because the illustrations, I believe, are very important. Before I go to the illustrations, let me pause again and ask, is there anything that I've said so far that anybody doesn't understand? I know sometimes I go galloping along and I leave people behind, but so far it has been kind of simple and straightforward. You don't understand the prophecy, but at least I want to know that you have an idea of the explanation that I've been trying to give, because it will get a little clearer as we go along, even if we don't have perfect understanding. All right, so let's go back to the illustrations. All right, so the next chart I have here is a little more challenging. Now, this is a chart that I want to use to explain to us why I believe that this king, this terrible king, is not Antiochus, and it's not the EU. I believe it's the papacy. What we have here is a comparison between Daniel 7, Daniel 8, Daniel 11, and 12, and also 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And where does 2 Thessalonians 2 come in? In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, in verse 4, I don't want to switch back and forth, so I'm not going to put the verse on the screen. But you will remember it says that the man of sin sits in the temple of God, claiming to be God, and he magnifies himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. We remember? As a matter of fact, let me just take the time and go back, because I hate to be just saying things like this in a vacuum. I prefer if we look at it, even though bottom right pane, bottom right panel. Let me show my screen. Bottom right panel, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Let's go down to verse 4. Look at what it says. Let me start from verse 3. That day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition. Paul refers to him as the man of sin, who opposeth and exalted himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped. Now, here's the critical thing. so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. This is why I believe this person has to be the papacy, because where is this man sitting? He sits in the temple of God. Now, this is not a secular personality, because remember, we are in the New Testament, and in the New Testament, we use New Testament principles. Where is the temple of God in the New Testament? It's not Jerusalem. It's not the Vatican. The temple of God is the Christian church. In the New Testament, the temple of God is a Christian church. This man of sin is a professing Christian sitting in the Christian church. Something else also, we looked at this on Thursday during the webinar, something else also that points out that this person is a professing Christian. It says, that day shall not come, the coming of Jesus shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin is revealed. Where does this falling away take place? It cannot be a falling away in the world. It cannot be a falling away in Europe. Those places don't belong to God. They have nothing to fall from. They were always fallen. Europe was always fallen. America was always fallen. The nations of the world were always fallen. When it says there comes a falling away, it's talking about apostasy in the Christian church. So, and it says when that happens, that man of sin will be revealed. And it tells you the marks of this man of sin. He opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worship. Now, this is why I say I have to revise my thinking, and I have to say that this person has to be the Pope. There is nobody in history, unless there's somebody to come in the future. There's nobody, no Christian, nobody in the Christian church who has ever filled this description apart from the Pope. Sits in the Christian church, exalting himself above God, sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Furthermore, to strengthen this point, it says that from the time of Paul says the mystery of iniquity is already working. The working of evil influences to bring about this man of sin was already working from the time of Paul. But it says, only he who letteth will now let until he be taken out of the way. And what this means, if you look at another version, another translation, the word letteth is an old English word, and it means restrains. The one who is now restraining this work of iniquity will do so until he's taken out of the way. Then that lawless one will be revealed. What Paul was saying was that there was somebody in the Christian church who was restraining this work of iniquity, and this person would be taken out of the way, and when he was taken out of the way, then that son of perdition would be revealed. Who is it that was in the Christian church restraining this work of iniquity? I believe it was Jesus. I believe it was the Holy Spirit. I believe as long as the Holy Spirit was working mightily in the Christian church, this man of sin could not raise his head. But Satan was already working even from the time of Paul. He was already working to quench the power of the Holy Spirit. Human organization, human influences were taking over the work and taking over from Christ. And Christ was restraining, but he was going to be taken out of the way. The great apostasy came in, and then that lawless one, that man of sin, was revealed. So based on Second Thessalonians 2, I hear Brother Ian, based on Second Thessalonians 2, I am persuaded that this person we look at in Daniel 11 here, I mean, I've suggested other interpretations, but based on this, I have to revise my thinking and go back to the idea that this is the papacy. Go ahead, Ian.
Then the last part of that verse in Second Thessalonians, say that lawless one whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. This is suggesting that the papacy or the Pope is going to continue to exist until Christ comes?
Yes, because the Pope as a person will not be killed when Babylon is overthrown. Catholics
Right.
will not be killed. The system will go down, but the people will remain until the coming of Jesus.
Yes. And then again, Babylon is not just the Catholic Church.
Exactly. Exactly. So now let me go back to my other illustration. Let me see. I think I can do this. I didn't know I could do this, but I think I found out that I can. All right, it's gone anyway. Let me go to my other illustration. I found out that I can switch without having to come back here, but I have to remind myself how to do it. Anyway, here is the chart where I have all the chapters put together. In Daniel chapter 7, we are pretty sure, we are pretty secure with Daniel 7. All right, it says that there the fourth beast, the little horn on the head of this fourth beast, it makes war with the saints. It is different from the others. It speaks great words against the Most High. It continues for three and a half times. Uh, I'm going to go and look at all of these characteristics. But if you look at Daniel chapter 8, and this is where Brother Warren's question comes in. Daniel chapter 8 corresponds to what happens in chapter 7. And Daniel 11 corresponds to what happens in 8 and 7. In other words, what I'm saying is that all three chapters are covering the same history, the same history. Let me show you a few things. For example, look at the orange. Look at the parts highlighted in orange. In Daniel 7, it says he speaks great words against the Most High. In Daniel 8, it says he magnifies himself to the Prince of the host. In Daniel 11, it says he speaks great words against the God of gods, and he magnifies himself above all. And of course, in 2 Thessalonians 2, it says he claims to be God and he magnifies himself above all. It's the same person. All of them talk about this little horn persecuting the saints. It makes war with the saints in that yellow section, cast down the stars to the ground. It persecutes the saints in Daniel 11 and 12. All of them in this green highlighted section, the second section, it says is different from all the other horns that were before. In Daniel 8, he's described as a king of fierce countenances and understanding dark sentences. In Daniel 11 verses 37 to 39, it shows you he is different from all the other kings. He worships the God of forces and he honors a God that his fathers knew not. All of them say he's an extraordinary, different kind of king from all the other kings. In other words, I'm going to make this chart available to everybody who wants it, but you can go and look at the verses because I have the verses beside each thing. And if you go and look at these verses, you will see that there's no real reasonable question that all of these chapters are talking about the same person. So if at any point any of these refers to Antiochus Epiphanes, then you have to go right across the chart with it. The little horn in Daniel 7 would have to be Antiochus as well. And 2 Thessalonians 2 would have to be Antiochus as well. 2 Thessalonians 2 is probably one of the key passages because it highlights this person. This Paul is almost quoting exactly from Daniel 11. You can look at Daniel 11 and you can look at 2 Thessalonians 2 and you can see that the same words are there. He magnifies himself above every god. All that is called God or that is worship. He's quoting from Daniel 11 and he's talking about somebody who remains until the coming of Jesus, as Brother Ian just highlighted. So absolutely, this is not Antiochus Epiphanes. It's talking about the dynasty of popes. It's talking about the dynasty of the papacy. So this is my conclusion as far as this king is concerned, based on what we have looked at here. Now, we could go and look at all of these verses and compare them. But like I said, I'm going to give you the chart. Those who are interested, you can just look at the verses. They're right there beside the verse is beside each part. Each section has a verse beside it. You can just go and compare the verses on your own, and you'll really see that the similarity is very striking.
I have a little bit of question about the three and a half times though.
All right. I'm going to come on to that as well. Be sure of that.
Brother Dave.
Yes, Sister Diane.
Um, I just want to know the significance, and I'm not really sure if I understand if the papacy, I don't know if we should call it that, but if Babylon is gone, if Babylon falls, what's the significance of the Pope remaining? I mean, what purpose does he play if there's no papacy?
By the time Babylon is destroyed, it's the end. Remember what it says. It says it right. If you look at that mauve section right at the bottom. In Daniel 8, it says he shall be broken without hand. In Daniel 11, it says he shall come to his end and none shall help him. In Daniel 7, it simply says the judgment shall sit and they shall take away his dominion. So all of them talk about the end of this little horn. But what do you do with the Pope when Babylon is destroyed? You do nothing, but he remains. He's still the man of sin. He's still waiting. I mean, he's there. And when Jesus comes, what happens to him? He's destroyed by the brightness of his coming. He has no purpose after that point. He has lost all influence, but he still has lived his life as an enemy of God and of the truth. And he will be there. And he will be destroyed by the brightness of the coming of Jesus. That's Paul is just commenting on it that way.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, Sister Dad. So the next section, I hope this will be useful, but the next section of the prophecy, we are looking at, now this happens at the time of the end. Give me a second, this thing here. All right, this is the time of the end. And it says at the time of the end, this chart is not perfect by any means, but let's see if you can follow what I've put here. Up at the top, in the light green, I have the southern king on the left pushing at the king of the north. All right, I don't know who this southern king is yet, but he pushes at the northern king. And I'm going to suggest that the northern king then, if we are going to follow this sequence, this king of the north is the papacy. Okay, if we follow the sequence. So the king of the north is the papacy. Somebody pushes at the king of the north. Now here are the challenges. Brother, I forget which brother it was that suggested that this could be Turkey. Brother
No, I'm sorry.
that not Turkey, that it could be Islam. Right. Now, the
Yes,
first
I was going to say that. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was about to say Islam.
Please interrupt, Sister. I know that when you interrupt, it's a good reason, so I don't mind. My mouth runs the wrong direction sometimes, so please correct me. Yeah, the first question we ask, and this is a real question, I'm going to put it there. Last week, Brother David Campbell said something that makes a great deal of sense. He said that at this point, who is Israel? Now that's a serious question, because right throughout the chapter, Israel has been the people living in Palestine. These have been Daniel's people, the people living in Palestine. Right throughout the chapter, those are Daniel's people. But this chapter, in chapter 12, it says, at that time, thy people shall be delivered. Everyone that shall be found written in the book. Who are these people? Are we talking about Jews or are we talking about Christians? If we say it talks about Christians, then should we not be consistent and change everything too? If the identity of God's people changes, should not all the other symbols change in keeping with that particular change? It's like Paul says in Hebrews 7 verse 12, the priesthood being changed, there is made of necessity a change of the entire law. I mean, it's not the same thing, but it's kind of like the principle. He's saying that if you change one part of it to be consistent, you have to change everything. So I'm saying the same principle kind of applies here. So without being dogmatic, I'm saying that makes sense to me that we should consider it in this way. I'm going to show you some reasons. Yeah, yeah. I'm going to show you some reasons why I think that makes sense. Go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, so in keeping what you said, and I agree with you, the king of the north was not always the pope. We saw that it was political and mostly coming along until it becomes religiously um, empowered. So if the king of the north becomes more spiritual, a spiritual kingdom, a spiritual force rather than a physical one, and the people of God is also considered now from a spiritual perspective, not a physical Israel, then the king of the south has to be looked at in the same way from a religious or spiritual perspective. That's my way of seeing it.
Right, exactly. So at this point now, you can find a logical way to say, well, the king of the north is now a religious entity, so we have a justification for saying, so the king of the south, the conflict changes from physical, political, physical conflict, and it takes on religious overtones. We have justification for saying this if we accept this principle. So that's what I mean when I say if we can find a principle, a logical principle for approaching it, then we can begin to look in that direction. Let me show you something else. It says this king of the north will attack like a whirlwind. What does he use as his weapons? Anybody remembers? Or do we need to go to the Bible? All right, let's go to the Bible then.
Flattery. He uses flattery, right? Is that the
No,
one?
no, not this one. Let me, where is it that I can just switch? I want to be able to switch quickly. Oh, yes, here it is. All right. No, it doesn't do it. All right, let me
You
take a
hit
look.
the share screen button twice. Hit again to toggle from and give you the option to switch the screen.
It's not doing it. It's not even giving me the option to do this until I first of all stop screen sharing, which I have to stop it and then start again. Oh, I know what happened. I know what happened. Sorry, I think it's my fault. I have minimized the Bible. Um, no, I don't even remember what I was going to look at. Oh, yes, right. Daniel 11. Um, it says, look at what it says here. In verse 40, the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. Look here. Who is fighting war with chariots and horsemen in the time of the end? Nobody fights with chariots and horsemen. That in itself suggests that what we are looking at is a symbolic thing. It's symbolic. That in itself, okay? There's some kind of symbolism here because nobody fights with chariots and horsemen. Because remember, we are looking at the time of the end, the time of the end. And I also, if in case I forget, somebody please remind me to take a closer look at this time of the end, because it's very interesting that maybe in many ways we have maybe misunderstood what this time of the end really is talking about. All right, there, it did it. Straight to the next screen. Very good. Okay, I think I found out how to do that. That's great. All right, so that's one thing. The king of the north counterattacks like a whirlwind. And he uses chariots and horsemen and ships. Next thing we see that he does, he attacks, he enters the glorious land, all the orange colored things. He passes over, he enters and he flows over. It's like water passing over these countries. But he talks about his warfare. He just flows over everything. He enters the glorious land, and the glorious land we see is Jerusalem. And but apparently for some reason he doesn't attack Edom and Moab and Ammon. There you see it in the blue, they escape. But Egypt does not escape in the pink. and the Libyans and the Ethiopians are following submissively. Now it says that if you go over to the right panel, where I have the letter written in red, it says that he controls Egypt's wealth, all the wealth of Egypt. That's another strange statement. Is Egypt rich? Anybody knows, does physical Egypt have any money?
Oil.
Egypt may have some oil, but it certainly is not one of those oil-rich Middle Eastern countries. Egypt is really a nation that is just going through the motions. It has no greatness left in it. Right?
This is a symbol of Egypt.
That's what I'm leaning towards, because I'm saying it's if it's talking about real money. I mean, let me go back to the Bible to show you what it says, because sorry, I have to be switching back and forth, but now I know how to do it a little more easily. It's a little more seamless. It says, he shall have power over the treasures and the gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. You know, the Bible is saying it like this is some great thing. Like Egypt is a place where there's gold and there's silver and many precious things. And this northern king has power over all these things. So that's another thing I'm looking at, and I'm thinking, I have questions whether this is really speaking about literal Egypt, because anybody conquers Egypt, they're not going to be boasting about the gold and the silver down in Egypt, because there's no great wealth in Egypt. If you attack the Vatican, or you attack the United States or Fort Knox or something, okay, if you're talking about physical riches, you have some places in the world that you can boast of if you are able to conquer them, but Egypt is not one of them. But this northern king, the Bible highlights it as a great thing that he has power over these treasures of gold and silver and these precious things of Egypt. So that's another thing that suggests to me we're not talking about literal Egypt here. All right, so the next thing we see, look in the middle panel in orange. It says he sets up his royal tent in the glorious holy mountain. In the King James Version, it says he shall set up the tabernacles of his palace. But if you read other versions, it says his royal tent. Okay, royal because he's a king. Tent, why a tent? The tent of his palace. A palace is the dwelling place of a king. But it's a tabernacle because it seems to me like it's a temporary dwelling place. It's a temporary headquarters. It's not his place. But he goes to the glorious holy mountain, Jerusalem, and he sets up his place. Is this literal, or do we continue to be figurative? The next thing that happens, if you look at those blue arrows, it says he gets news from the north and from the east. Why north and why east? He is the king of the north. Are we now talking about symbolic north and symbolic east, or literal? If we say it's literal, then we are looking for nations like maybe China and Russia to attack the papacy. And what about the east? Well, east is mostly, yes, you have China from the east and from the north of Europe. True north, I don't think you have any real enemies there. You have to go northeast to get to Russia and China. So physically, there could be some great danger there, but we have to ask the question, if we are looking at this in a spiritual way, why would we say it's physical north and physical east? It says because of what the news that he hears, because of what he hears, he goes forth to destroy. I have it as that little last pink section at the bottom. I don't know, maybe it should go right across. right? Anyway, I put it in the southern part. The northern king goes forth to destroy and to do away many. And at this point, he comes to his end, and nobody is there to help him. Now, here's a major question I want to ask you. I want us to consider this as well. I'm asking questions this evening because I'm not suggesting that I have perfect answers, but I want to ask the questions because I think they are good questions. Here is the question. Does this battle involve the work of God, the gospel, and the people of God? Or is this just a battle among secular powers? Because if you go to the book of Revelation, God is constantly trying to point our attention to the final conflict between his people and the forces of the Antichrist. Constantly. Everything that God is telling us is revolving around the efforts of Satan through these secular powers to try to destroy his people. Here, as the climax of the book of Daniel, you have this conflict between the northern king and the southern king, and God and somebody caught in the middle. If you look at that middle section, it says, he sets up his royal tent in the glorious holy mountain. And then he gets news from the east and the west, and he goes forth to destroy. Who does he go forth to destroy? Because he had already attacked Egypt. He had already conquered the Libyans and the Ethiopians. Who does he go to destroy? So everything depends on who do you understand this northern king to be. If it's a secular power, then he goes forth to destroy other nations in a secular way. But again, you're thinking, this is not the theme of prophecy. Prophecy is not just there to tell us about warfare among secular nations. It usually involves how everything affects God's people.
Can I ask a question, David?
Yes, go ahead, Nikki.
Maybe it's just more than one question because this chapter has left me with a lot of answers and also lots of questions. I can now appreciate the first part of the text, as Sister Dan says. It's more historical, so you can sort of maybe understand somewhat better. Because as I mentioned before, you started before last that I was so confused. But based on last week's discussion, I can appreciate now a lot of history behind the chapter. But when it comes to chapter verse 40, I'm wondering, and it might not even make sense, but I'm just wondering, you mentioned about the time of the end. Is it the time of the end as related to what happened in history with all of these, kings and all of these nations that I mentioned in the few verses above? Is the time of the end related to that, or is the time of the end catapult to the time of the end of time? When Christ is almost coming. Is it something of future? Is there a future event to this part of it? I'm not quite sure if I fully understand. And then in verse 40, what is the horseman and the whirlwind? Is it all literal when you think about other part of the chapter, or is it something um symbolic? And then the other question I have is what news, what tidings from the east caused the trouble on the king of the north? So all these questions are still in my mind. I don't know if we're going to be able to answer all of them or if they even make sense.
I will. They make a lot of sense, Nikki, and I'm going to try to suggest an answer to all of the questions. Of course, as we have been saying over and over, nobody wants to set anything in stone, but at least we can have some kind of ideas. So the first question you asked, can you repeat the first question? Because it kind of gave me a beginning and it just slips me. Do you remember the first thing you asked?
Yeah, I was just wondering if the time of the end, I think a sister asked about
All
the
right.
time of the end.
Thank you.
Is it
Thank you.
referring to the end of what happened in the
I got
first 8 verses.
I got you right. That was the key thing. So if most Adventists will say the time of the end was 1798, but if the time of the end is 1798, what it says is that at the time of the end, the king of the south will push at the king of the north. I who can find something happening in 1798 where some power pushed at the king of the north? Because all of this happens at the time of the end. When he pushes at the king of the north comes against him like a whirlwind at the time of the end. So
Eclipse says
1798, 1798 was a few hundred years ago. And if that was the fulfillment of it, then we have been waiting a couple of hundred years for the prophecy to be fulfilled. It is overdue by a few hundred years. What the Bible shows us is that at the time of the end, that's why I've highlighted it up here, because I intended to talk about it. So thank you for bringing it into highlight. And I'm going to show you why this also, there's another reason, and we need to go back to the Bible so I can point out that reason. So let me switch. All right. I am very sorry that I can't have the drawing and the Bible up at the same time. I can actually get it up, I think so, but I don't know if it will be too small for you to see the drawing. Let me see if I can do that. Um, okay. Let's go down to I'm going to go to a verse in Daniel chapter 12. I wanted to look at what happens here in Daniel chapter 12 in verse 7. Let's start from verse 1. Daniel chapter 12. I'm going to start from verse 1 so we can kind of get the background. It says, "At that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book." So here you have Christians who are delivered, not Jews. Well, some might be Jews, but certainly not the Jewish nation. And this is out of the midst of a time of trouble such as never was, the greatest time of trouble the world has ever seen. And this happens when the great Prince Michael stands up. But when does all this happen? What is it that initiates it? If you go to the previous chapter, right at the end, it says, the king of the north plants the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end and none shall help him. When the king of the north comes to an end, then Michael stands up. Then there's a great time of trouble. And I would correlate this to Revelation 17 when the 10 horns hate the whore, make her naked, eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. Because I don't believe this is speaking about the coming of Jesus, because it appears in Daniel chapter 7. It appears in Daniel chapter 8. In Daniel chapter 7, if you look at my illustration, that mauve part at the bottom, in Daniel 7, it says, "The judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end." In Daniel 8, it talks about the horn. It says, "He shall be broken without hand." In Daniel 11 here, it says, "He shall come to his end, and none shall help him." All of this happens to this great enemy of God's people. So when he comes to his end with nobody to help him, at this point is the deliverance of God's people. Right at this time, shortly after, at that time, thy people shall be delivered. So the end of this king of the north is one of the last great events to take place on this planet. Now, let's go on. And of course, it says, many of those that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame, some to everlasting contempt. Those that are wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever. Those who share the gospel, brother Joshua, those who tell others, they will shine like the stars forever and ever. Then he says, look now, but thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Okay, so the time of the end is the time when this book is to be understood. And I would say right at this moment, we're still struggling to understand it. Okay? It was to be shut up and sealed until the time of the end. You might say, well, people have always had some understanding, but there have been reformers over the ages, Albert Barnes, Gibbons, these people who had good understanding of some parts of the book of Daniel, but the parts that have really concerned the final moments, especially Daniel 11 here, they have been veiled in darkness even until this moment. Nobody has any certainty as to what some of these things really mean. We are battering with it this evening. And the angel said it is to be sealed up until the time of the end. So that in itself can kind of make you understand. Are we past the time of the end? Is it already gone? So Daniel sees the two angels standing on the both sides of the river. One said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, that is Michael, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? He wants not the time of the end, the final end. He wants to know when is the final end. And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and he sware by him that liveth forever and ever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half. When he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. That is the final end. Now notice when he says it will happen. When he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people. When is that? What do we refer to that event as? What does it mean the power of the holy people is scattered? What power do the holy people have? What Michael said is that when the king of the north scatters the power of the holy people, everything will be finished. And it will be for a time, times and a half. And then that will happen. Yes, Sister Di.
David.
Sister Di,
I
and
was,
then you, and then the other person.
yes, I was just agreeing with you. I was thinking in terms of verse 40. I was saying, all that we have read before was all historical. When we get to these verses, the reason why everyone's struggling is because it's future, and it's difficult to predict future events, because we're not prophetic unless God gives us the Holy See, unless we become the Holy See. But until things unfold, and that's why I think we're struggling, because you can see 40 and the rest of the book is all future. And
Amen.
so to me, that time of the end has to be the time of which we're now living, as opposed to something that has been past, because the time of trouble, God's people will be scattered. The time of trouble comes, Jesus stands up. So all of that fits together from 40 to the end of chapter 12, as far as I can see.
I agree, Sister Di. Somebody else was saying
So,
something.
yeah, I wanted to, so Brother David, the beast, the king of the north then is not the beast.
No, having looked at it more closely this week, my conclusion is that no. I mean,
Okay.
in a
So
way,
when,
you could say in a way, because look here, in Daniel 7, it is represented as the horn on the head of the beast. So
okay,
in these prophecies, it's represented as being connected to that empire. We see the separation in Daniel in Revelation 17, but in the book of
yes,
Daniel, it's represented as a horn.
yeah. So in chapter 17 of Daniel, of Revelation, then when the beast becomes the eighth, that little part, how does that fit with the king of the north? Because now the beast has become the eighth head.
That's when the king of the north goes down. That's when he comes to his end, and none shall help him.
Okay, and then everything wrap up shortly after.
Exactly.
Okay.
Brother, was it Brother Matt
Yeah,
wanted to say something?
yeah. I think these verses right here are in direct correlation to Revelation 11, and when the two witnesses are killed, and for 3.5 years they were able to witness, and the beast rises out of the pit. I think these are direct corresponding verses to these in Daniel.
Yes, Brother Matt, it's hard to get away from that conclusion. It says, when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people. And it, as you say, Revelation 11, it fits perfectly because the two witnesses are killed. And shortly after, you have the voice that says, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. The death of the two witnesses, the scattering of the power of the holy people, it represents the end of probationary period. It's the point when nobody else can share the gospel because nobody else will listen to it. This is when we come to the end. But look at it. It says that it will be for a times and a half. There is a 3.5 year period. There's a 3.5 year period. And at the end of that time, the God's people will lose their ability. Their power will be gone.
David,
And that is when all
something
these
just
things
came
will
to
be
my mind.
finished.
It says the other diagram that you have shows that tidings out of the north and the east troubled him, and he went away to do away with many. So this to me is like this is when he's killing the witnesses, right?
Yes.
And what the tidings I think could be, would it be when the witnesses came back to life again?
Well, okay.
And the king of the east is Christ, right?
Absolutely. It would be that the preaching, the Bible always represents the north, or at least in Isaiah, several places it represents the north as the dwelling place of God. Beautiful for situation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. So Lucifer said, I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. There are several places in the Bible where north represents the throne of God, or God's headquarters. So you can find north and east are used in the Old Testament several times to refer to the glory of the Lord comes from the east. The sealing of God comes from of God's people. The angel comes from the east. So you have symbolism there that could really fit right here when it says, if this northern king, is the enemy of God's people at the end of time, then you can see how news of what God's people are doing, news of the preaching of the gospel, the sealing of God's people, infuriates him, and he goes to destroy God's people. But he comes to his end. The secular powers turn against him, destroy him, and he's broken without hand. He comes to his end, and nobody can help him. But the last thing he tries to do is he launches an attack against God's people. So
Have a little bit of
Brother David,
touch there though, at one point though, because in Revelation 17 it says that the 10 kingdoms, which are the 10 horns and the beast, they give their allegiance to the beast for 1 hour, and they shall make war against the lamb, but the lamb shall overcome them. I wonder how that fits in there.
I'm coming to your brother Ray and sister Di. The thing is,
And Brother Wayne.
and brother Wayne, if you look at the type, in the time when the Christians were in Jerusalem, who were their enemies?
Which time? The Romans, maybe? It depends
Right
on
Rome.
which
after
time.
Christ. You had Rome and you had the Jews. They
Right.
were they had two enemies, not one enemy. And I think at the end it will be the same thing. Apostate religion as well as a secular power, both of them will be enemies of God's people. Remember, eventually both the secular power and the false religious system, they came against each other, and the secular power destroyed false religion, but God's people escaped. And I see it the same way as at the end. So I really see that God's people will be under attack from both elements. Brother Raymond, Sister Diane, and then Brother Wayne.
Yeah, Brother David, thank you so much for taking your time out to explain this and all these questions that are coming out. They're awesome. I'm trying to make a parallel with what we have gone through in the past about the two witnesses that are killed, and they celebrate over them, then they come back to life. Now, I'm trying to understand that the angel tells Daniel, shut up the books to the time, because the time is not yet. So I'm trying to make a parallel here. Whereas so when these witnesses are dead, they're celebrated. That means that the religious authorities and powers, they cease, and nobody wants to hear the gospel anymore, or something like that. We could just think about that. But the point is that now, after they celebrate everything, all of a sudden they come back to life. So I'm wondering, does this has to do maybe because these two witnesses are dead? Okay, then you have atheism going on and all these things going on, all the abominations going on, and now these witnesses come back to life. So I'm wondering if this is the last episode in Earth's history where the loud cry comes in and the Spirit is poured without measure because these two witnesses they wake up again, and they marvel.
Um,
They marvel because they just, at first they celebrate over their carcasses and now, they come back alive.
yeah, in my understanding, when the two witnesses are killed, the power of the holy people is scattered. This is the last witnessing on this earth. They have received the power of the Holy Spirit before. This is when the tidings out of the north and east troubled the northern king. Okay, they have received the Holy Spirit, the power of the Holy Spirit. They have done their work. Then they are killed. They will never again preach the gospel. So why does the Bible say they come back to life? How do they come back to life? And I believe they come back to life in this sense, only in a sense, and it is in this sense. If you, we just read that at that time there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. What happens to the world at that time? They recognize that what these two witnesses have been saying is true. It does not convert them and it doesn't change them, but they are compelled to acknowledge that it was the truth. In other words, they kill the word of God and they kill the spirit of God, and they are joyful. They rejoice in what they are doing. And suddenly that word of God comes to life before their eyes, because everything that the word of God said, everything the Holy Spirit was telling them, begins to be fulfilled before their eyes. They recognize that they have been fighting against God. So in this sense, the witnesses come back to life, but not in the sense that the witnesses are able to convert or preach or help anybody. It's just in the sense that prophecies are fulfilled in such a dramatic way that they cannot deny it. That's what I understand it to mean.
Also, so
Right.
that means it's a recognition at the very end that makes that what they did. Oh wow! So they themselves recognize this is what it means that it comes back to life. I thank you for that. But
Absolutely.
that's really good.
Yes, Brother Ray. Sister Di, go ahead.
Yeah, it's nothing much. I was just thinking in terms of what you're saying about the time of the end and these 3.5 years. There's seemingly a silencing of the witness, and when he gets the tidings, it's like everybody's come under his dominion. Everybody's believing, thinking, and doing what he has compelled them to do. He's brought everybody under submission. And he finds out, wait a minute, everybody's not submitted. And there's this notion that there's this stirring up of this truth that is being revived. I think it might sound far fetched, but in my mind, that's what I think happens with him when the whole world comes under this power of thinking, and they all are in agreement except the witnesses, and they are some, we don't know what happens and what will happen to us, but something happens that we become known. In a way we become known, and that's the tidings that he gets, and that's when he comes after us.
Hmm. So, Brother Wayne, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Yes, I think my thought is to some extent still in line with what has been said. Um, uh, when the disciples received the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, how long after Christ's death that happened?
It was 50 days.
Um, we say it said Christ was baptized in what AD what again? Because
Baptized
when
20.
you're right. 'Cause when I was looking at the old 3.5 year talking about in Revelation here. And I was just thinking, is there any relationship with, the outpouring of the Spirit after what Christ went through in comparison to, as you said, the end of the 3.5 years, or at the time when the witnesses come back to life, is to reveal the power of God, to see that God, what should I put it? God's power. Not that this is going to cause any conversion. However, after Christ's crucifixion, God's power was placed on the disciples. In that case, there was conversion, but in the end of time, there will not be any conversion. Do you see any flow there?
Yeah, there is definitely, I mean, there is definitely a lot of parallelism and symbolism in these prophecies and the time periods, because as you pointed out, Jesus was baptized with the Holy Spirit and he ministered for 3.5 years. Then he was killed. Look at Revelation 11. It says, God says, I will give power to my two witnesses. They prophesy for 3.5 years. Then they are killed. Then they are resurrected, and they are raised up in the eyes of everybody. So it's a parallel to what happened with Jesus, and the Bible is showing us this parallel. It's pointing to this parallel. Um, so it's how we interpret, how we look at that parallelism that's important. And to be honest, as I'm looking at this, we always say that the time of the end began in 1798. I mean, Adventists say this, okay? But when as I'm reading this verse by verse coming down, when did the attack of the southern king against the northern king happen? Was it in 1798? I mean, I think our pioneers said something like it was atheism, it was France attacking the papacy. But clearly, I mean, that doesn't follow the pattern of who the king of the north is and who the king of the south is. As we have been looking at it together, what I am seeing is that we're talking about an end time series of events. This to me is like a marker of maybe the final 3.5 years, when you have a parallel to what happened in the time of Jesus, to the ministry of Jesus. You have the 144,000 who are the image of Jesus Christ, who are mirroring his experience. God is taking them through the same kind of experience where Jesus is again being revealed on this planet. Divine glory stands face to face with the greatest darkness that Satan is able to produce. So I think it is best if we stop here for this evening. I know it's a tricky place to stop because there are some elements on the chart that we have not cleaned up the loose ends. But I think we're going to stop because, in my experience, when you discuss something too long, people start to zone out. They start to get tired, and it's difficult for their minds to concentrate. Those of you who want to continue and you say we're not tired, there are 85 people in the room, and you're only one. So be thoughtful
I
of the
agree.
others who may not be as
A lot
able
of
to.
people might, a lot of people might not be saying anything much because we are thinking so much about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I understand. But my experience tells me that it's wise to not overdo it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop here for this evening. I will take, if there are any, I know there are some people who maybe don't talk a lot. If you have any questions, then we can try to respond to those questions. But I'm going to clean up the chart next week in the sense that we're going to look at the areas that we didn't discuss, and we're going to try to see if we can bring everything together in such a way that it's clear. What I want to emphasize is that what we look at this evening is just one perspective. But based on all the information that we have been getting, the discussions, and looking back at the passage, this perspective appears to me to be the closest that we can come to when we look at all the evidence. It appears that way to me. I'm saying it very carefully because I know none of us knows everything. But I hope at least we have a better idea of the prophecy, and we might even be able to approach it in another way, but with good background information. So I hope that has been helpful.